There's a moment from the 1994 World Cup that stays with you if you were watching. The United States had never hosted the tournament before. Nobody was quite sure what to expect from a country where football was still finding its footing, where the stadiums were borrowed from American football, where the crowds would be largely unfamiliar with the rhythms and traditions that European and South American fans had grown up with. And then it began. And something extraordinary happened. Those crowds were extraordinary. The atmosphere was extraordinary. Romania and Ireland produced a match of such feverish intensity at Giants Stadium that old hands in the press box admitted they'd rarely felt anything like it. The football found a home in a country that had been told it didn't belong there. That World Cup still holds the all-time attendance record. 68,000 average fans per game, 3.5 million total. 32 years later, nothing has surpassed it. I think about that 1994 tournament a lot when I think about what's happening around 2026, because 1994 was also a tournament surrounded by noise before it began. Questions about whether America was the right host, whether football could thrive there, whether the commercialization was getting out of hand, and then the football answered all of it. The question in 2026 is whether the football can do the same thing again, because the noise this time is louder, more organized, more documented, and coming from places that matter, from football federations, from consumer organizations, from football historians, from the players themselves. There's a word at the center of this conversation, a word that football governance has always feared above all others, a word that once it enters the public discourse around a major sporting event rarely leaves quietly: boycott. And on May 26, 2026, 16 days from the opening ceremony, that word is as present as it has ever been around any World Cup. Not in the form of a coordinated withdrawal, not as a likely outcome, but as a genuine, sustained, globally spread expression of discomfort with what this tournament has become, and specifically with whether it still belongs to the people who love the sport. Let's talk about what's actually driving it. There have been boycott calls around World Cups before. You know that if you've been watching long enough. The discussion before Qatar in 2022 was sustained and serious. Human rights organizations, supporter groups, a handful of European politicians, but it stayed largely in the sphere of activism and commentary. No national federation seriously threatened withdrawal. The squads went to Doha, the football was played. 2026 is different in a specific way. The sources calling for boycott conversations are more diverse, more credible, and more formally organized than anything the sport has seen before. From within European football itself, Oke Gottlieb, a president of FC St. Pauli and a vice president of the German Football Association, said publicly in January that the time had come to think and talk about a boycott concretely. He invoked the 1980 Olympic boycotts. He drew a parallel that historians of football will recognize. In 1980, the United States led a boycott of the Moscow Games in response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. 65 countries followed. The argument was simple: participation equals endorsement. Attending gives comfort and legitimacy to conditions that should not be comfortable. Gottlieb was applying that logic to 2026, and he was not alone. In the Netherlands, a petition calling on the Dutch national team to withdraw from the tournament gathered 174,000 signatures and was formally submitted to the Dutch parliament. The Dutch government said it was a matter for the federation, not the state. The federation ruled out a boycott. But 174,000 people, nearly 1 in every 100 citizens, had signed a document asking their national team to not play football.
From beyond Europe, Al Jazeera published an opinion piece in February arguing directly that Africa must boycott the 2026 World Cup. The argument referenced the continent's role in the 1976 boycott of the Montreal Olympics, when African nations withdrew in protest of South Africa's presence, a boycott that ultimately worked. 28 African nations left Montreal. The pressure it generated contributed to South Africa's eventual sporting isolation. The Al Jazeera piece was asking whether 2026 represented a comparable moment of principle for African football. 25 British members of Parliament tabled a formal parliamentary motion in January calling on global sporting authorities to consider excluding the United States from hosting the tournament entirely. Former FIFA president Sepp Blatter, the man who ran football's governing body for 17 years, said publicly that fans should stay away, that they'd see more from their televisions anyway. Former UEFA president Michel Platini echoed similar concerns. These are not fringe voices. Taken together, they represent a sustained, multi-continental, multi-institutional conversation about whether the 2026 World Cup can justifiably be attended and celebrated by football's global community. And that conversation has not gone away. It has, in fact, been fed by new events almost every week since it started. What FIFA fears about this boycott isn't the boycott itself. No major national federation is going to withdraw. The sanctions for withdrawal under Article 6.7 of FIFA's own regulations are severe: fines, bans from future competitions, exclusion from youth tournaments, loss of all FIFA development funding. Alan Rothenberg, who organized the football tournament in the 1984 Los Angeles Games and then led the 1994 World Cup, told the LA Times directly that the possibility of an organized boycott is slim to none. The machinery of FIFA, the financial stakes, the career implications for players who would be kept from their one chance at a World Cup, all of it makes formal withdrawal almost impossibly costly. What FIFA actually fears is something more subtle and more lasting. It's the slow erosion of legitimacy, the gathering sense among football fans worldwide that this organization has stopped acting in the interests of the sport and has become primarily an instrument for generating commercial revenue at whatever social cost that requires. That fear is justified by the evidence. The boycott conversation didn't start because of one decision. It started because of a sequence: fan access restrictions, ticket prices 6 times higher than what was promised, hotels underperforming by hundreds of millions of dollars, communities in host cities being displaced by short-term rental conversions, fan festivals canceled across multiple U.S. cities, 4 qualified nations whose fans cannot attend, a qualified nation, Iran, having to base itself in Mexico and cross the border on match days because the host country doesn't want it staying on its soil. And then, in the middle of all of this, an announcement that changed football in a way it has never been changed before: the halftime show. On March 5th, Gianni Infantino confirmed via Instagram that the 2026 World Cup final would feature the first halftime show in the tournament's 96-year history. He announced Coldplay's Chris Martin would help curate the performers. The final performers, confirmed on May 14th, were Madonna, Shakira, and BTS. The show is being produced in association with Global Citizen. In every previous World Cup final, halftime was 15 minutes. Players went to the dressing room, managers made their tactical adjustments, fans found the facilities, and the match resumed. That 15 minutes has been one of football's most sacred rhythms since Uruguay and Argentina played the first final in Montevideo in 1930. For 2026, that rhythm is being extended for a concert in the United States, produced by the frontman of a British band who helped organize the Super Bowl halftime show in 2016. The reaction from football fans was, to put it gently, mixed.
On social media, the initial responses were visceral. The game is completely gone. Super Bowl 2.0. It's all about money now. They are ruining our beautiful game. Colombia coach Nestor Lorenzo had already criticized the extended halftime at the Copa America final in 2024 when Shakira performed, saying the additional break disrupted his team's tactical adjustments in the rhythm of the match at a critical moment. A World Cup final operates on incomparably higher stakes than any Copa America fixture. To be fair to FIFA, 82% of American fans surveyed said they supported the addition and believed it would enhance the World Cup experience. The tournament's presence in North America, where sport and entertainment have always been inseparable to the host nation's audience, makes a halftime show feel less alien to a fan in São Paulo or Milan or Lagos who has watched football finals for 40 years without one. But here's what the halftime show represents in the context of the boycott conversation. It's not just a concert, it's a signal, a declaration of intent about what kind of tournament this is becoming. When you add Super Bowl-style entertainment to a World Cup final, when you introduce commercial breaks through mandatory hydration stops in every match, when you apply U.S. entertainment market pricing to ticket sales, when you expand the field to 48 teams for reasons that are transparently commercial, you are making a series of decisions that, individually, each have arguments in their favor, but collectively tell a story about the direction of travel. That story is the one the boycott movement is responding to, not any single decision, the direction of travel. What makes this genuinely difficult to assess is that the counterargument is also real. Football has always changed. The World Cup has always been a commercial enterprise. The tournaments that produced the most enduring memories, Italy 1990, France 1998, Japan and Korea 2002, Germany 2006, were all surrounded by controversy about over-commercialization, about format, about the expansion of the field, about whether the sport was becoming something other than what it had been. And the football survived, more than survived. It produced the moments that define generations of fans. Baggio's missed penalty, Zinedine Zidane's headbutt, close equalizing against Brazil in 2014. Those moments live in the game, regardless of what happened in the boardroom. The question for 2026 is whether the moments exist despite the surrounding noise, or whether the surrounding noise has finally become loud enough to muffle them. Here's what I think matters most, having followed this sport for 30 years and watched 3 World Cups in the United States across different decades.
The boycott movement is not going to prevent the 2026 World Cup. It is not going to empty the stadiums. It is not going to stop the final at MetLife on July 19th. What it has done, and what it will continue to do, is change the relationship between football's governing body and the fans who consider themselves the sport's true custodians. That relationship, once genuinely broken, is extraordinarily hard to repair. FIFA's position, that demand is unprecedented, that prices reflect the market, that the halftime show brings the tournament to new audiences, that sport should be outside politics, has a coherent logic to it. And Infantino is not wrong that 500 million ticket requests, however they were generated, represent something. He's not wrong that football in North America is in a genuinely different commercial environment than anywhere it has previously been hosted. But the people signing petitions in the Netherlands and the German Federation executives calling for boycott discussions and the fan groups filing complaints with the European Commission are also not wrong. They are describing a real experience, the experience of loving a sport and watching it be priced, packaged, and marketed away from you in real time. That is what's growing worldwide, not the formal boycott, the feeling, the sense of loss, the question of whether the tournament that has sustained so many of us across so many decades has finally decided that we are no longer the primary audience it cares about. 16 days from the opening ceremony, the football is ready, the teams are ready. Iran is basing itself in Tijuana and crossing the border for match days.
DR Congo is in quarantine in Belgium because of an Ebola outbreak in their home country that has been designated a global health emergency. 174,000 Dutch citizens asked their team not to go. And somewhere at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, stage managers are already assembling the equipment for a halftime show at a World Cup final, something that has never existed in 96 years of this tournament. I'd genuinely be curious what you think. Not about whether a boycott will happen, it won't, not at the team level, but about the feeling underneath it. Do you think the World Cup has changed fundamentally, or do you believe, as I still partly do, that football has a way of making everything else irrelevant once the ball starts moving? Leave your thoughts in the comments. These conversations are the ones worth having before the tournament begins. If this gave you something to sit with, a like helps more than you might think. Subscribe if you want to keep following this properly, every angle, all the way to July 19th. Football has survived worse than noise, but it's always been the fans who carried it through. And the fans, right now, are asking questions that deserve real answers. That's the story underneath every boycott call. Not anger, something quieter and more lasting. The feeling of being left behind by something you helped build.